I'd like to thank Nora and the committee that thought of me to give a talk here. I've given a couple lectures at Nora, and it's always a pleasure to be back and see all the Noraites. As I said you last night, they call them Nora nerds, but not really, at the award ceremony. I'd like to just jump on the previous Scott's talk. One of the things that I got peripherally involved in very recently is at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, CHOP. One of the references that Scott had was Tina Masters and Return to Play, and she's done Return to Learn and those kinds of things. So one of the things that she wants to do is replicate some of the investigations we've done with VEP, oculomotor control pupillometry, in her children. So these will be children that have a concussion, a fresh concussion, no more than 72 hours after the concussion. Do the testing, 2 weeks later do the testing, 2 weeks later do more testing. So the hot area certainly is children, and certainly they deserve to be the focal point of our energy. If I had more energy and more years, I probably would go in that direction also. But what we'll do today is talk about clinical and objective vision biomarkers. And I think of the clinical tests that we do as high-yield clinical tests, and I conceptualize them as biomarkers, even though the literature sort of demands, but sometimes I break the rules, demands that they have to be objective in nature. So I'm going to talk about both. If you don't like the word clinical biomarkers, you could cross it out mentally and just call it high-yield clinical tests that help me diagnose, help my patient, give me information that I can understand my patient better and hopefully help in diagnosis, prognosis, and therapeutic intervention. Over the years, I told at the awards last night, I said I'm an overnight success. It only took me 40 years. And it's sort of true. I don't know if I'm a success, but it took me 40 years to get where I am now. And over the years, I've done a fair amount of research in TBI as well as other areas, especially in the past 10 years. And I think about what are the potential contributions to optometry, because even though I'm a clinical researcher, I'm really an optometrist at heart, and I still see patients on and off at the clinic at SUNY. So one of the hot areas when I started doing some work with the Army and DOD was an area of biomarkers. What are the biomarkers for concussion, and then can we monitor any remediation effects or natural recovery using these biomarkers, as well as other standard clinical tests that we might use. So that's sort of the thrust of the talk, the idea of biomarkers. And I just think of them as clinical tools or laboratory tools. And some of the laboratory tools that I'll talk about are getting more and more into the clinical realm. And I'll discuss that later on too. So I see the clinical and basic science or laboratory information not as two distinct entities, but really one with lots and lots of overlap in the Venn diagram. So one of the first things is, as Scott alluded to, with these little tykes who get a concussion or they feel a little strange, concussion can be a vague symptom. Other medical diagnoses might have the same complaints, like, gee, I have a headache, that sort of thing. There might not have been an observable time of the concussion, or the person may not have had an altered state of consciousness for a lot of reasons. Maybe they didn't really have much of it, or they have PTA, which sort of remediates, is a helpful way of not remembering these kinds of things. And also, our next speaker is going to talk about brain imaging, which is a very important area. And up until recently with DTI, there's not very much information that we can get from having a concussion or a mild traumatic brain injury from some of the standard clinical testing, and that's been used by lawyers to say it's all in your head. And I always say, yes, it is all in our head. Where else could it be? So I agree with you, and when you agree with the lawyer, they don't know what to do, because everyone always disagrees with lawyers. So you just have to agree with them, and they shock and they fall over. It's okay. Another point is unscrupulous motives. I mean, I don't see that as, at SUNY, I don't see that as a big area, but certainly there might be some patients where they have unscrupulous motives, getting money, getting time off from work, claiming that they have a concussion. I've seen a couple patients absolutely like that over the years, but not very many. So for these and other reasons that you may have, we need to have various kinds of biomarkers, whether they're sort of a clinical biomarker or a laboratory biomarker, of some additional information that you put in your armamentarium of tools. And I have a talk called Bag of Tricks, and it's really a bag of tools. And you don't need too many tools clinically to make a diagnosis. You don't need a VEP system. You don't need infrared pupillometry. The most important tool is what? Your brain and your head and your experience. So let's talk about first some so-called clinical biomarkers, or at least high-yield tests, or also tests if they're not real high yield. They give a lot of insight and information about your patient, in particular with respect to reading.